Hello everyone, good morning. Hope everyone is doing great. My name is Tidiane Guindo. I'm a master's student in economics from Mandalas University in Indonesia. So today my presentation is all about the Bayesian implementation with verifiable information. It's a paper from Esteban Peralta in 2019. So moving forward, here with the motivation and the background. So Peralta here first he has started to answer why implementation theory. So the designer want to implement a social choice rule, a social choice where the outcome is based from the community. So he said also agent has some private information. So the outcome then rises in the Bayesian equilibrium. So the core problem is that in classical model, agent can misreport anything. Agent can provide any fake document, falsify anything they want. But in reality, some information is verifiable, just a document, certificate audit, paycheck, everything that can be verified is included in your life actually in the Bayesian equilibrium. So the other question here, you want to know to understand how can a planner design a mechanism that leads agent to behave in a way that produces a desired social outcome. So generally, as we know in the traditional theory, agents have private information, right? And they can report anything they want, whether it's true or not. At least they can report. But in reality, in real world setting, some part of their information are verifiable, right? There are verifiable such as document, certificate, or this result. So the main question of the author is that how does verifiable information change the condition under which Bayesian implementation is possible? Is the core question that author has been has asked and has tried to answer thoroughly in the paper. So moving forward, with the summary of his paper of the article, right? So the summary of the article here, what we can understand here, the paper study, right, a core question in Bayesian implementation, right, which is a social choice rule. Uh, Social choice rule can be implemented, right? Can be fully implemented when agents have verifiable information, right? So the main contribution is introducing a new condition, right? Called evidence distinguishability, right? The ED. So this condition means that any coordinated, right, lie that is feasible can be broken, right? So because at least one agent prefer to deviate using available evidence. So the key empirical result is that it's very sharp, right? So evidence distinguishability plus evidence compatibility are together necessary, right? And sufficient for full Bayesian implementation using direct mechanism. These are directed mechanisms. So, however, the paper also shows an important limitation. In the summary, the author has provided some limitation by mentioning if an allocation is incentive compatible, right? Even without using evidence, then evidence distinguishability forces the allocation to satisfy Bayesian monotonicity, right? At every verifiable deception. So Bayesian monotonicity is a framework, is a concept where if to break, right, people lie together or collectively. So since the Bayesian monotonicity is a very strong and restrictive condition, right, to find a way to break, right, to find a way how they can break the chain of, of lie that is going on step by step from every angle, right? So the conclusion is that direct mechanism have limited power, right, even with verifiable information. Therefore, to fully exploit verifiable information, the designer generally needs indirect mechanism, not simple direct ones, but they need indirect mechanism, right? So overall, here the summary of the paper here over what we can understand right? Moving with this one, this it's all about the distinguishability, the evidence distinguishability plus incentive compatibility together are really necessary and handy and efficient for full Bayesian implementation using direct mechanism. So the overall here, the paper clarify both the power and the limit of verifiable information, right? Verifiable information in Bayesian implementation, right? So it's the author here uh, has really pointed out, right, highlighted that normally an agent can lie about everything, but here information, right, like documents, certificate cannot be fake because the paper ask, right? The paper here mainly asks how this changes what a designer can implement, right? How these collectively changes what the designer want to implement. So the main contribution here is to introduce evidence discernibility plus evidence evidence incentive compatibility. Right? So this together is fully necessary for full Bayesian implementation. So moving forward with the literature section, right, the gap, and also it's very important to identify and to go through the literature, what's the gap and what the author has tried to find, in order to continue with the rest of the paper. So moving with the literature review, what I have summarized, right, from the whole literature review section is that he said the paper, right, the literature was not clear, right? The literature, firstly, before he started to review some related paper in the study, he said the literature was not clear on what the verifiable information, right, actually, actually reduces or actually help, right, in Bayesian implementation when information is incomplete. Right? So in practice, in particular, I mean, in practice or in general, right, most results, right, focus either on environment, right, without verifiable information, right, or complex indirect mechanism, right. So it was under control. You can say it was a little bit blurry, right? Whether simple direct mechanism could effectively use verifiable evidence, right? This paper fill that gap. The gap is its main contribution is to properly identify when direct mechanism can exploit verifiable information and when they cannot, right? To do this task, right, this work, the paper introduces key concept, right? Firstly, we have the evidence incentive compatibility, the EIC. This means that truthful reporting is optimal, right? This ensure that truthful information is optimal, taking into account that some type cannot provide certain evidence, right? Cannot provide certain evidence or cannot fake certain evidence. So therefore, the work here is that the second one, evidence discernibility, is the most important part because to get a full Bayesian implementation, two conditions need to be held, right? So the second condition is the evidence discernibility, right? The condition guarantees that any feasible coordinate lie can be broken, right? Because at least one agent prefers to deviate using verifiable evidence. So using these two, right? These two concepts, using these two concepts, the paper shows a clear result, right? So the clear result is that uh, direct mechanism, right? Direct mechanism have strong limits. And even when verifiable information exists, direct mechanism has strong limits. So as a result, the paper highlights the essential role of indirect mechanism in full exploiting verifiable information for Bayesian implementation, right? So this is the gap that the author has tried to fill up. So moving forward with the introduction and the motivation, right? So the introduction and the motivation, right? The introduction here and the motivation here, it's all about standard implementation theory, right? Agent can generally find some assumption that agent can freely swing some information, right? Can really try to manipulate some of the information. So in reality, information that are often verifiable, right? As example, we can see here, uh, tax income in document, monitor work effort, right? So the key question here, as I mentioned previously, can verifiable information help achieve right outcome that conflict with agents incentive, right? So, and the literature also, what we know from the literature, right, with complete right information, verifiable evidence allow full implementation even when monotonicity fail. Right, the monotonicity fail means here if people try to lie collectively at the same time. So these results heavily depends right on that on indirect and complex mechanism. Right. Moving forward, in the most important slide, the model setup, right? The model setup here is very, very important and paramount in the implementation process, right? So as we can see here, N, right, greater or equal to 2 agents. They're indexed by E equal 1 with a lot of infinite set of agents. So agent can be spent from 1 to N. So the outcome, infinite set of outcome also. If we are having infinite set of agency, and we need to have infinite set of outcome. So agent type, each agent I has pair of relevant parameter, right? Here we can say the phi is element of the phi one, right? The parameter mostly in this case is quite, we assume that, or the author assume it's quite hard and difficult to provide fake parameter, right? So we have some set of verifiable messages. So messages can be document, or interview, or direct conversation, right? And the E, right? The E sub I is also element of the epsilon, right? Sub Y. So we have type. The type here we have TI, right? The type here we have the parameters and the evidence. So as we can see here, this is we have their type. Each agent has their own type. They have their parameters and they have their evidence. So type space, they have also their own type space. Here we have the T1, okay, T sub E equal the phi multiplied by 2 power epsilon sub y. So this means here it's all about that agent have their own parameters, right? They have their own evidences, right? So here each agent E has no component for private information, right? Has two components for private information, as we can see here, right? Has two components. We have the parameters and type of messages, right? So the pair of relevant parameters. The first agent E, right? Let's name it E, has a parameter phi, right? So this parameter directly affects, right, the agent ability, right? So for example, it can represent preferences, right, cost or valuation, right? This is the parameter. So the verifiable messages here, evidence, uh, it's all about second agent E, right? Agent I mean, agent I has a set of verifiable messages, right? First, we said here, agent I has a parameter phi. So secondly, here we have agent I has a set of verifiable messages, that is the E sub I, sub Y, right? That is here, the E sub I is element from the epsilon I, right? Sub I. So here, example, we mean here, um, these example include documents, right? Certificates or action that cannot be fake, right? These messages represent evidence that agent can represent, right? These messages, those are the one they can represent. So importantly, different type. So if we have different type, may have access to different evidence. So as you can see here, if we have different type, right? If we have different type, they might be having different type of evidence, right? So therefore, the key assumption here that verifiable messages, right? Verifiable messages are private information. The designer uh, does not observe that indirectly or directly, right? So here, the designer does not observe them directly, right? So, however, they cannot be fake. What we can note it here, what we can highlight here, that they cannot be fake. So here it means that if an agent does not possess some evidence, they cannot report it. So if they report it, they need to provide some evidence. So we can also be mindful that verifiable messages are often payoff irrelevant, right? It means a utility depends only on the outcome, right, and the parameters, not on the messages provided by each agent. I think that's fair enough. So let me briefly come to this. Here we mean here we have the type, right? So type is defined by TI, right? Equal the parameter and the evidence. So a type includes both the agent preferences and the evidence they can represent or they can provide. The type space here is, right? As we can see the type space here, we have the phi sub I multiplied by 2 epsilon power epsilon pi I, right? So moving forward with the benefit section. Right? The benefit section, what do we mean here? It's very simple, right? The benefit section here is quite really relevant in the implementation process. So all agents share a common prior, right? A common prior over the type, right? Over the type. This is a agent from beliefs. This is their common prior. So the common prior is after the full support on T. Right? So here, what we can really be careful with after observing, right? The prior has full support. Full support meaning every type is possible. Right? Every type here, this is a common prior. This one design represent the common prior with full support on their T, right? So after observing their own type, each agent form beliefs about others, right? This is their beliefs. Agent from belief. So this is the belief they form from each other, right? Each other. Here the mu here is in parentheses, right? T, right? Minus sub minus I, right? We have here the bar and the T sub I, right? This one here means after observing their own type, each agent, so they form their beliefs about others too, right? So the allocation rule, social choice function, right? This is here we have the allocation rule, social choice, uh, social choice function, right? Here, as you can see, the X, right, equal T to the direction of A, right? So what mean here? It's all about that assigning an outcome to every profile of type, assigning outcome for every profile of type. So because uh, type include evidence, right? The outcome can depend on payoff, right? Payoff parameters and verifiable messages. Right. So here we have the interim utility. The interim utility, what do we mean by here in this equation, right? Giving, right? Given an allocation X, right? Given an allocation X, right? The interim utility, as we can see here, right? The interim utility of agent I with type T is, right? The agent takes an the agent can take an acceptation, right? Expectation, right? So their expectation over other agent type using their belief, right? Using their belief, right? So utility depends. Yeah, what we mean here, utility depends on, right? These. Their utility depends on the outcome chosen by the mechanism, right? The outcome chosen by the mechanism, their own parameter, the phi, and others, other agents parameters. But again, not all the messages, not on the message directly. It's not on the message directly. This is what one of the most important note that someone can really note here for a lifetime. But again, be really careful. We need to be mindful here. Not all the messages, not on all the messages, right? So it means here, it's not only or it's not on the messages directly. So the big picture, yeah, the intuition here is in this section, this slide. Uh, this model separates preferences from evidence, right? The parameter and the evidence. Evidence restricts that agent cannot lie about, right? But does not directly, right, affect the payoff. It does not directly affect the payoff. So this distinction is what allows the paper, the author, right, to study how verifiable information, right, changes, right, the Bayesian implementation, right. This section is all about that. So moving forward with the implementable framework, right, this is quite very important and relevant, right. Here we need to be really careful. So as I said, all of this section, the author has clearly highlighted, provided thorough explanation in the deep of the paper, right, in the deep of the article. So here the implementation here, we mean, right, sorry, okay, all right. So, so here, right? So here, in the implementation framework, we have the mechanism, right? The mechanism here is defined as M, right? Is defined as M equal, right, C and G, right? This, the C sub I is considered as the chip talk messages, right? Any type that they can send, right? Messages, and the outcome depends on chip talk plus the evidence messages. So the strategy equilibrium, their strategy and the equilibrium here is that the strategy here we have the sigma, right, equal the T sub I equal here the Ci multiplied by the 2 power E sub I. What it mean here? What do we mean here? And if only available evidence is reported, so focus on pure Bayesian Nash equilibrium, right? The B and E. The full implementation is that an allocation X, right? X can be fully implementable if every B and E, right? Bayesian Nash equilibrium of the mechanism heals, right? Here heals XT for all T. For all T here I mean the type. So we mean here that it's quite very easy, right? So the chip talk message, what do we mean by that? For every agent, right? C is the set of chip talk messages. Chip talk message mean any type, right? Any type can set any chip talk messages, right? Any agent can set any chip messages. Messages are countless, right? They can set a lot of messages as long as they want, right? The messages are not verifiable. Messages are mostly direct conversation, right? Or written form. It's hard to verify it, right? It's kind of very difficult. So we have set of verifiable information, right? So the set of verifiable information here, in addition to chip talk, right? Agents can also submit verifiable messages. So these are pieces of evidence. These are pieces of evidence that are private information, right? Cannot be fake and depends on the agent's type, right? So the key feature of the mechanism is that the outcome depends on chip talk messages plus evidence messages, right? This is what we can see, right? So the strategy here is mean that this one, uh, this one, right? The T sub I lead to the C sub I multiply by 2 power E sub I. What mean that, this concept? Yeah, it means that for every type, the agent chooses a chip talk message, right, and a subset of verifiable message to report. Right? For every type, for every agent, they usually submit chip talk messages and plus set of evidence or evidence that are verifiable. Right? So, and the feasible strategy here, we mean here like agent can report evidence that they actually possess. Right? Those evidence that they are providing, they are those they possess. Right? This is what they have. So so here, in other words, agent cannot lie about evidence. It's quite hard, at least. In some cases it happens, but it's quite hard in real life, mostly to fix some evidence, right? So the equilibrium concept, right? The paper here focuses on pure Bayesian Nash equilibrium, right? In Bayesian Nash equilibrium here, as we can see, right, we have each agent maximizing expected utility. Right? They are maximizing their expected utility, given their beliefs, right? Uh, Taking other agent strategies as given, right? Other agents strategies as given. No agent want to deviate given what they know, right? They don't want to deviate from the set or from the tool, from what they know actually. So the full implementation, right, is strongly required. The full implementation is strongly required here in this case. So an allocation rule X is full implementable if, right, there exists a mechanism M, right, a mechanism parameters, right, and verifiable information, just that are very Bayesian Nash equilibrium, right? That's such a very Bayesian Nash equilibrium and lead to desired allocation X T, right? This is the desired allocation X T for all type T, right? So what do we mean here in this slide? That, right, no bad equilibria, right? No bad equilibria, no unintended outcome, right? Wrong desire or wrong outcome. The designer completely control equilibrium outcome by considering all of these collectively combinedly together. They control the equilibrium outcome, right? So moving forward here with the direct mechanism, right? The direct mechanism here, what do we mean, right? So we have some agencies, every type report they type directly, right? So it's all about that. It's all about that. It's a new concept, right? This one is quite new, far different from the classical one, from the classical model. This one is new, and why this new condition is needed, right? The implemented in direct mechanism, right? Why it's needed? So it's mostly needed, right? It's mostly needed. Why? Even if agent report truthful, right, in one equilibrium, there may exist other equilibria where they coordinate online. Okay? They can coordinate online. So full implementation require eliminating all just bad equilibria, right? To eliminate all of this in order to have a desired outcome, right, or good equilibria. With verifiable information, the designer may try to use evidence to break this coordinated, right, this coordinated line. So this motivates a new condition called evidence distinguishability, the ED, evidence distinguishability, right? So that evidence distinguishability means the following, right? What's mean? It means that for every feasible deception, right, there is a joint misreport that agent may actually make. They can make it up, right? So if this exists, at least one agent and one type who can use available evidence, right, and deviate in a feasible way, right? To obtain, right, to get really a strict better outcome than under the deception, right? So in simple word here, what do you mean here? Uh, no coordinate lie can survive because someone can profitably expose it using true evidence, right? So deception, anyone they can report, right, feasible information, right, feasible faking information, right. Truth information is that the BNE of the direct mechanism, right, best Bayesian equilibrium. So every incentive comparability, no agent gain by reporting a false parameter, right? They can gain. So at least they are having the monotonicity also can become will come up. So by hiding information, verifiable messages, right, or weaker than standard IC, right? The standard IC. So due to verifiable constraint, right? We are having verifiable constraint because the model by itself here includes verifiable information. So we have the Bayesian monotonicity, right? The BM. This is really powerful. I can say very strong. It eliminates coordinated deceptive equilibrium lie, right? Uh, it uh, it requires like a preferences reversal, right, for some agent at any deception, right? So the key condition for full implementation under incomplete information, right? So this is what this section is all about: the direct mechanism in order to have a full Bayesian implementation, right? Full Bayesian implementation process. So here we have the Bayesian monotonicity, the BM, and evidence incentive compatibility. Together, this one can be considered as a truth telling, right? The truth telling is that the Bayesian Nash equilibrium of the direct mechanism, right? Moving forward with the implementing direct mechanism, right? Implementation direct mechanism here is a little bit the contrary of the other one, right? The contrary of the other one, right? So what do you mean here? Implementation direct mechanism here. As I said before, we have the evidence distinguishability, the ED, for any feasible deception, right? Some agent type can probably deviate from available evidence, right? So the deviation may brings out, right? May offer a street, right, better outcome than the deceptive one. Definitely, that's quite clear here. And in the main results section, we have the proposition one, right? The proposition one here, an allocation is fully implementable by its direct mechanism, right? If it satisfies evidence incentive comparability, evidence disability. These two together then can be considered like the Bayesian is fully implementable, right? So evidence disability, that deception can be for a deception agent can probably deviate from using available information, right? So every incentive compatibility here, agent want to tell the truth individually, right? A lot of agencies, a lot of people, they would like to disclose the reality. They would like to reveal the truth. So in order for the Bayesian to be fully integrable, right, or fully acceptable, right, it need to be having these two conditions, right? So moving forward, as we can see here in the key implication, right, for the proposition one. So it's all about that. It's very clear enough, as I explained previously in the previous slide, that verifiable information does not automatically solve the full implementation problem, right? It doesn't solve it. At least it can help eliminate bad equilibria only when it holds, only if the evidence distinguishability holds. So if the most important one, the ED, the evidence distinguishability, if it fails, agent may still coordinate one, it's called on deceptive equilibria that the designer cannot, they cannot break using a direct mechanism. It's quite very hard. So the paper here further has also highlighted that showing a strong link with classical theory, right? It's so like it's a strong link with the classical theory. So if an allocation, right, if an allocation is both evidence distinguishability, the ED, and incentive compatibility, then it must satisfy the Bayesian monotonicity, right, at every feasible deception. It might satisfy here the Bayesian monotonicity. This so that the ED is demanding condition, right, is the most important and the most needed condition in full Bayesian implementation, right? So moving forward, it has some limitation too. We need to acknowledge that the coronary limit of indirect mechanism, right? Here, as I mentioned here, it has some limitation, right? If behavior monotonicity fell at feasible deception, right, then the full implementation of the IC allocation require direct mechanism, right? It requires direct mechanism for sure, because if behavior monotonicity fell at feasible deception, then a direct mechanism cannot fully, right, implement an incentive compatible allocation. In just cases, right, if just cases happen, the designer must rely on indirect mechanism, right? Rely on messages indirectly, right? So the key takeaway in this implementation in direct mechanism is that verifiable information has limited power in the indirect mechanism, right? So it does not eliminate the need for indirect mechanism, right? In real value appears when, right? In real value, it appears when the mechanism uses richer message space, right? Or allow agent to signal any deviation in more complex way, right? So in brief here, verifiable information help, but it does not overturn, right? It does not entirely eliminate the fundamental limits of full Bayesian implementation, right? This is what we can really summarize from this implementation direct mechanism, right? So moving forward here, in the discussion section, the indirect mechanism, the author here has provided some limitation, as I said, of the direct mechanism. Yeah, the Bayesian monotonicity, the BM fell at feasible deception. Direct mechanism cannot fully implement, right, the IC allocation, right? So it's very clear here in the role of indirect mechanism, right? As I said, allow richer message space, right? Chip talk plus evidence, right? Can block the self equilibrium, right? People collectively try to break or the chain or the equilibrium. That direct mechanism cannot, right? It cannot block the deceptive one. So new concept here. The author has mentioned some new concept here. The new concept is of the Bayesian evidence monotonicity, right? Action Bob, the Bayesian monotonicity, he extended the Bayesian monotonicity in the classical one, he extended both, and evidence distinguishability, ED. Consider by considering type that can masquerade as others, right? That can be masqueraded as others. So the key idea, right, of the BM here is that it's very clear. As if we go back a little bit, the Bayesian monotonicity, right, and we have here the Bayesian evident monotonicity, right. These two, and plus the author has expanded a little bit in the paper. So moving forward here, the Bayesian, the Bayesian evident monotonicity, this capture, right? It's captured the power, right? It captured the power of indirect mechanism. The paper introduced a new concept. I said it extends the Bayesian and both, right? The evidence one. So masquerading type. The masquerading type is very great idea. It's really very important here because the key idea behind the Bayesian equilibrium, right? The Bayesian equilibrium monotonicity, right? As we can see here in the indirect mechanism, right? The Bayesian evidence monotonicity. So here in this next slide, so the key idea behind that is that some type can pretend, right, to be others, right? Some type of agent, they can pretend to be others, right? Some others type, because they possess at least the same evidence, right? If they possess the same evidence, they can at least pretend to be at the type. So the key idea of the BEM, right? The BEM is the Bayesian evidence monotonicity is that for any deception, right? There exist, right? There exist some agent and some type who profitably deviate. They might deviate, as I said before. They might definitely deviate from the tangent, right? Using messages that only certain type can set, right? They can use messages that only certain type can set, right? So the allocation rule used to push the deception, right? The allocation rule used to push the deception. So does not need, so the allocation does not need to be consistent across all type, right? It does not need to be consistent across all type, right? All agencies, right? Uh, all across the type that could masquerade as the deviator, right? That can masquerade as the deviator, right? So uh, this flexibility is what makes indirect mechanism more powerful, right? The indirect mechanism is really more powerful and influential by accepting or considering this mechanism, because any deception, right, they exist one agent and some type, right? They exist some agent, right, who can properly deviate, definitely using messages that only certain type can set, right? That only certain type can, they can deviate from that. This flexibility uh, can make, right, indirect mechanism more powerful. So why this EBM matters, right? Why it matter in the Bayesian implementation? Why it matter? Because the BM is weaker than requiring the BM, right? The BEM is weaker than requiring the BM, right? At every feasible deception, right? The Bayesian evidence monotonicity and the Bayesian monotonicity, like the BM is weaker, right? So this means that some allocation fail BM, right? Some allocation, the Bayesian monotonicity, some allocation might fail it. So therefore, they but still certify the BM. Then some allocation might fail the BM, but still certify the Bayesian evidence monotonicity, right? That can therefore, right, be fully implemented by indirect mechanism, right? That can be fully implemented by indirect mechanism, right? So therefore, here the most important thing that we can really note here that the BM capture, right? It capture exactly the extra power provided by indirect mechanism. So the main takeaway here that for full implementation in general mechanism, right? Uh, Evidence incentive compatibility, the EIC, as I mentioned previously, and behavior evidence monotonicity, the BEM, right, are necessary conditions. Verifiable information is most effective, right? Verifiable information, they are mostly effective when used through indirect mechanism, right? When used through indirect mechanism, not in the indirect mechanism, not indirect direction, right? Or not in the direction, not in the indirect way, because uh, it cannot be, it cannot hold the condition, right? So the verifiable information, what I need to be clear enough here to bring some idea and some insight on it. So the verifiable information is most effective when used through indirect mechanism, not direct mechanism, right? It's fair enough. So moving forward with the discussion section here, right? The discuss the extension and the robustness, right? So the distinction and the robustness here, we have the diffuse priors, right? The diffuse prior has no full support, right? So the paper first relaxes the assumption that all type profile a positive probability, right? The main insight remain unchanged, right? The main insight remain unchanged. Uh, that full implementable depends only depends only on type that occur, right? Occur with positive probability, right? And the mechanism does not need to work of the equilibrium direction, right? So as a result, an allocation uh, may be implementable through an equivalent allocation, right? But a weaker version can cause problem, right? An allocation can be fully implementable through an equivalent allocation, one that behaves identically on a relevant type profile, right? However, right, the corollary one may fail in this case, right? The corollary may fail in this case, right? But a weaker, as I said, version still holds, preserving the main intuition, the main theoretical intuition, right? So what we can really understand here that full implementable depends only on type profile with positive probability. So the main evidence here, the main evidence structure, right? The paper here assume, right? The paper here assume the agents can submit all type, right? Can submit their evidence at once, right? They can submit the evidence as once. This assumption is known as normality. All agencies sending their evidence at once. This assumption is known as normality. Under normality, under the normality, we have here all results continue to hold. It might hold, right? Both truthful and implementable must become easier, will become easier, right? So if this combination of evidence cannot be set, if it cannot be said, agent have fewer opportunity to mimic other type, right? Definitely, they might have fewer less opportunity to really imitate or mimic the other type. So the incentive constraints are further relaxed, right? The incentive constraints are further relaxed. So therefore, the results are rubbish to reasonable restriction, right? On evidence reporting, right? Here is very clear enough. If some combination of evidence cannot be said, agents have fewer opportunity to mimic other type, right? And the incentive constraints are further relaxed, right? So moving forward with the mixed strategy, right? The mixed strategy here, what do we mean? If the paper focuses on pure strategies, right? It focuses first on pure strategies. So what do we mean here? The pure strategy allows mixed strategies, right? Raising concept difficulties, right? That does not full implementable mean when agents randomize. When they randomize, despite this complication, key results survive, right? Key results can still survive. So evidence distinguishability, the ED here, it remain necessary, and a strengthened version of ED together with IC, right? And if despite this complication, the key results survive. Feasible or evidence distinguishability, the ED, it remains necessary. A strengthened version of ED together, right, with the IC, right, the incentive compatibility, right, characterizes mixed full implementable, right, implementation in direct mechanism. Therefore, allowing mixed strategies does not rescue direct mechanism. It doesn't rescue it because here, every discernibility remains necessary and it's certain version ED, right? Version ED plus the incentive compatibility, right? So the core robust insight, is that uh, across all extension, right? All extension, uh, across all extension, right? Prior evidence structure, right? And also the strategies, right? The same message emerges. So the direct mechanism face fundamental limits. The direct mechanism definitely face fundamental limit. Verifiable information cannot allow overcome this limit. It cannot, it's insufficient. So the overall takeaway is that the papers conclusion are highly robust, right? The paper's conclusion are highly robust. The rubbers here, relaxing exception does not overturn the main result. So verifiable information here does not eliminate here. Yes, we can see, does not eliminate the need for indirect mechanism. Its power, right? Its power is unlocked, right? It reveals, I can say, only when combined with richer institution design. If the institution is quite powerful and very strong, then its power is unlocked. Otherwise, it will be very difficult. Verifiable information does not eliminate the need for direct mechanism. So here in the conclusion section, what we can really understand the key messages in this paper in the article. Here, the article here is all about that Bayesian implementation verifiable information. So the key message is here: verifiable information significantly expand what can be implemented. Right? It can expand, we can extend what can be implemented. Right? The central result is that the EIC plus the ED equal the full Bayesian implementation. Then we have provided, the has provided theory and practice in the mechanism design, indirect and the direct mechanism, and it provided some, valuable, right, insight for designing institution, right, for designing some really plan for the sake of the community, and also to provide an extension to Bayesian implementation. He has provided an extension to that. So, and also it showed that when information is verifiable, the set of implementable social choice function becomes significantly larger, right? So the key result, as I said, the characterization here, the EIC plus the ED is equivalent to full Bayesian implementation. So this, this direction, brings theory closer to real world institution design, right? So here it's all about, also verifiable information does not eliminate, the need for indirect mechanism. So this is my last slide of my presentation. Thank you very much for the attention. Terima kasih. Thank you.